I'm a nurse, and I used to work at this long-term care home. It was a nursing home. So basically, it was two buildings. One building was the retirement home, and the other one is a nursing home. They're both connected via this hallway. So usually I work night shifts. It was around 5 a.m. in the morning. I was counting the narcotics as we do every shift because obviously it's very controlled and everything. And during the night, we had found one of my residents who was acting different than usually be acting. So he was in where it's right beside the nursing station, and I could see him to my left. I was counting the narcotics, and all of a sudden he looks at me. I never knew that this guy could actually see, but he actually looks in my direction and says, "Hey, you, come here." And I'm like, so I stop what I'm doing. I'm like, what did you need? And then he's like, "Oh, Ed, come here and tell those other four guys behind you to come with you." And mind you, I was by myself, and I'm like, you know what? He's probably just delirious. I just probably chalked it as delirious. And so I go up to the fourth floor where the manager was, and I'm like, "Hey, guess what happened? This just happened. I think this guy's seeing people," and he said that they're right behind me, and she just laughed at me because it sounded ridiculous because it sounded like another ghost story. It sounded like a typical ghost story, and I'm like, okay, then whatever. So I go back downstairs, and so I have two nursing carts that I have to count for the narcotics. So I went over to the other nursing cart, and as I was counting that one, he starts saying, on his chair, he's still in the same spot, he starts saying, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he stops and looks at me. At this point, I stopped what I was doing, and I was just watching him, and then he looks at me, he says, "And you make 5. I was just so freaked out. I called my staff because I was a charge nurse at that floor. I called my staff. I'm like, make sure you're watching him because he's saying some weird stuff. I just don't want him to get up off his chair and fall. I go home, and I have a shift the next day, right? I come in during my shift. It was around near midnight. I was receiving the new order of narcotics, and I was counting them. So, as the unit itself, we have a lot of dementia patients. So we also have residents that would just roam randomly because it's just their behavior. They would just roam randomly. And so we have this one lady, she always roams until, I don't know, 1 or 2 a.m. and then she falls asleep because she tires herself out. But she's always in a wheelchair. She just bothers the other residents because she would come in their room and then they get annoyed. And she's pretty funny because she does that. But at this time, as I was counting the medication, she comes up behind me. I feel a nudge behind me. And then all of a sudden, she starts counting. She's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm like, I stop. I really just stopped what I was doing, and then I look behind me, and this patient has dementia. But the thing is, sometimes you think that they would be in their own world, but then I ask her because they also respond, and then so I ask her, I'm like, hey, where did you hear that? She starts laughing, ha 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 ha. They told me to tell you that. So one of the times that I love night shift, by the way, because it's really quiet and I stay away from all the drama or the politics at work. because night shift is just so quiet. So one other experience I had was when I was new there. It was my first year. The building is shaped like a V, right? So we call it the east wing and the west wing. That's how we describe the different parts of each floor. So are they in the west wing? Are they in the east wing? So each wing has a window that peers out into the parking lot. But during the night, it's really dark, obviously, because they turn off all the lights. We actually turn off all the lights during the night shift in the hallway, and the only light you can see is in the nursing station. So it is really dark during the night. And whenever I do my rounds, obviously I don't turn on the light. I use my cell phone flashlight to see. So I went out to get food during one of my breaks. And then I come back, I see my manager on my floor. And I ask her, I'm like, hey, why aren't you on your floor? Because she usually never checks up on me. Because she only did it the first month because I was new. But then she said, oh, the second floor nurse, she saw something. I'm here to get you so we could both go and walk around with her to do her rounds. So I guess what happened to her is when she actually went all the way down the end of the hallway, she was telling me she saw a face looking out the window and she ran. Let's say you would be looking at me through a window. That's how it was, but she was on the second floor. So the face was on the other side of the window. That same morning, someone died. So this nurse was on the second floor, and her shift ends at 6:30, and the person died at 5:30. So I did ask her like multiple times. She told me in detail what happened. So she said that it was time for her rounds. So as she went to the west wing and checked all her residents, she always goes all the way to the end of the hallway to close the blinds because she didn't. It was around summer that time, and the sun rises really early. So she wanted to close the blinds so that nobody would wake up too early. And so as she went to the east wing and went all the way at the end of the hallway, she saw a face that's all white. And she couldn't tell if it's an old man or an old woman, but it was wrinkled and it was old. And as soon as she saw that, she bolted all the way to the third floor where our manager was and asked her to go with her to go on rounds. And she could not bring herself to even go back to that wing until she had to give medications at 5 a.m. in the morning. During the night shift, we have different chores. So the second floor charge nurse would be answering the phone. The third floor charge nurse would be going down, making sure that the doors to the link are unlocked around 5 a.m. so that the people who come in during the morning can just come through there. And the fourth floor charge nurse, they just run the supplies. Whatever supplies you need, you would go and get it for all the floors. I was at the fourth floor that time, and then my colleague at that time was on the third floor. So obviously he was in charge of unlocking the door and also checking if the server was backed up by checking a computer in the electrical room. So I told him, oh yeah, like scary stuff happens here. Because it's night shift. You just tell like the scary stories. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, man. Don't just make sure whatever you just don't mind it. That's what I told him. He was telling me too that he had an experience, but I don't really remember what happened to him. But I remember vividly what happened to us this night. So he goes to unlock the doors. I forgot to mention also, so the building beside us is a retirement home that has been vacated ever since after 6 months I've been there. So it's been vacated because they were planning to rebuild it and make it new. And so obviously it needs to be vacated. And basically nobody was there. Nobody is there during night shifts. Okay? So my colleague goes and unlocks the door as he and checks the servers, and then he goes up to me. He's like, "Oh, I guess the maintenance guy is early today." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "It's 5 a.m." So I'm like, "What do you mean he's early?" He's like, "Oh, I saw somebody in the building. He wears all black." And I'm like, "What?" And then I told him, "Yo, the maintenance guy, he comes in at 9 a.m. He never comes in that early. And there's nobody there, and it's locked." He's like, "Who did I see?" I'm like, and I told him, "Never mind, just do your work." I didn't want to scare him, obviously, but then I did tell him before that, like, if you see something, just don't mind it. He's like, "Okay." So the next night, we were in together again. So he has to do the same thing, unlock the doors and check the server. He comes back to me, and I was like, "Hey, yo, how's unlocking? Did you see anything again?" I was just making fun of him. And then he says, "Oh, I don't know. It was just funny. I just heard footsteps above me." I'm like, "How do you hear footsteps above you when the link has no floor above it?" Then he looks at me, his eyes just starts to widen, and I don't know what to say. I might not come in for my next shift. And so that was the end of that night, those 2 nights. Usually, typically, the night shift, you would finish your work on, if you were really diligent about it, you'd finish it within 2 hours. And then you just get to rest until you have to go on rounds, or until you have to go on rounds, and until you have to go to give your meds. So I finished my work pretty early. There was nothing to do that day. And so I was about to snooze on the chair in the nursing station in front of the computer. So I was facing to the right. Let's just say I would be facing to the right, and to the left of me would be the elevator. So I would be perpendicular to the elevator. And the elevator has a habit of opening and closing and going to random floors. For the longest time, I thought it was just malfunctioning, or it was a ghost. But it was really our housekeeper who was using the elevators so that she could get the big elevator to transport all her stuff. But that's not what happened, though. I was just snoozing there, and I was half asleep, and then I saw the elevator open, and I saw somebody come out and go to the west wing. And I thought it was my manager, because she would be doing audits sometimes. But then 5 seconds later, another elevator opens and she comes out. And I know it's none of my staff, because in front of me is a computer, and then there's a window where my staff just chills. And also, I know it's not the other staff, because they don't come to the other floors and go to the west wing all of a sudden. And then I asked her, I'm like, "Hey, did you just go to the west wing?" And then she's like, "No, I just got here now. What are you talking about?" So it was around 5 a.m. and the second floor charge nurse gets a call. And it was a police officer. So the police officer says, "Hey, I received a call from Mrs. Smith, and she said that she fell and no one would help her up." So the nursing home, every resident gets their own line for their phone. So they get their own individual number. Depends on what room you are, it doesn't matter. So they all get their own number. And she said, "Hey, is there a Mrs. Smith there?" The police officer said. And she said that she's not being helped up. I don't know what's happening. And then the second floor charge nurse, "Oh, that name sounds familiar. Let me just transfer you to the fourth floor manager," right? She puts her on hold and then transfers her to the nurse manager. And And that was it for the call, right? She would think. And the second call comes again from the police officer, and she says, "Hey, Mrs. Smith is still calling, and we've been running a trace on her number. We can't find it, but she says she's at your nursing home." And the way that they would know, too, is because she has caller ID. But they couldn't trace her phone call. And then she said, "Yeah, I'm close by the area. I'm going to stop by and see if she's okay." And then obviously the nurse is, "Okay, that's fine." So she comes through the elevator and she calls the nurse manager. She says, "Hey, the police officer is here asking about Mrs. Smith." And the nurse manager is, "I'm really confused why she's looking for Mrs. Smith, because Mrs. Smith has died for more than a year ago now." As soon as the police officer heard that, the second floor charge nurse saw her hair stand up. And the funny part was, the police officer just left without saying anything. And you know why this affects me is because I've taken care of that lady when I was new, before she died. Actually, it was on my shift that she got sent to the hospital. And then it was also on my shift that her family picked up her stuff because she was dying, and on that same day she died. And I know that another resident is already in her room, like living in her room, so it would really be impossible for her to be calling. That's why they couldn't trace her number. But she did call 911 and it got transferred and things like that. So the way I give out medications, I would bring my cart with me through the hallway. So it was this one lady at the end of the west wing, right? So her room is set up with a 4-bed bedroom. On her side of the room, there's a window that peeks over the parking lot behind the building, and also you would be able to see, so half of your view would also be the retirement home that's right beside it. And like I said, the retirement home is already vacated. So I come up to her and I give her medication, and then she tells me she's Filipino, and she tells me in Filipino, "Make sure my curtains are closed." And I'm like, "It's closed. Why would you want it closed? It's almost daytime." And then she said, "Oh, I can see them." I'm like, "Who's them?" Like, the people in the retirement home, they're all wearing white. I can always see them. And I was like, "Are you sure?" This lady, she doesn't have dementia. She's only there because it's her diabetes. Her diabetes is like almost uncontrollable, and she needed to be monitored a lot. You can actually have a normal conversation with her without having to question whether she's there or not. And then I was asking her, I'm like, "What do you mean you always see them?" And he said, "Every night I see them, which is why I close my curtain." And it's the same with my neighbor in front of me, which is why her curtain's always closed. And it's true. I even checked myself, because I never really taken these things, because all I'm really there to make sure is if they're breathing, they're alive, and they're okay. So I go and walk over and I check, and the curtains were really drawn. And part of her neighbor's curtain was tucked in behind the drawer so that it wouldn't even open. And she says that, she sees the same thing, which is why she keeps her curtains drawn. There was this couple that used to be in a room. It was a dual room. Dual rooms basically where two people can stay. And then, so there were a couple, and one of the PSWs, the personal support workers, basically my staff, she was telling me that Mr. D used to tell my staff whenever they would come in to basically get them up for the morning so that they can go to breakfast, to wash them and everything. He tells her, like, "Hey, the man in white visited me again today." And then I even ask his wife, like, "Have you ever seen this man in white?" And she says, "Yeah, I've seen this man in white. He would visit Mr. D all the time, every night. And then he would say, yeah, they would just have a conversation and then he would leave. And then apparently sometimes he would leave whenever I would do my rounds. The other nurses have also told me, like my manager has told me, there was this one time that she was doing her rounds and then she heard somebody exhale beside her ear, but there was nobody there. Nursing homes and hospitals, there's a lot of people that die. They die there. They pass away due to the heart complications and their body's just giving in. And what I think is that since they've lived there for so long, their spirits, I think, are just attached to it. And also the fact that we would have a new admission almost every month, because to replace the person that died, obviously, because you need to fill in the beds. As per the government's allocation, they would allocate people into the nursing home. What I really think is, since these people die, it is their ghosts that are basically either visiting or just attached to the place. They stick around to the place that they either like really recently have been living for a while, or a place that really means a lot to them.
Hey, see you in the next story.